The graph of y equals 1 over negative 2x squared minus 0.5 was reflected in the x-axis and its image is shown. We are all guilty of this from time to time. In this question in particular, this graph is not the graph that goes with that equation. Most of the time you get a question where they say, here's an equation, here's its graph. This is not one of those cases, so we have to be careful when we read a question. The graph of blah, 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 which isn't shown, was reflected vertically in the x-axis, and this is the image that you get. So what we want to find is the equation for this image graph. I find that for these questions, using function notation is really helpful. First of all, I'm going to think about what kind of reflection this is. This is a vertical reflection. A vertical reflection in function notation would have the negative outside of the function. That's what a vertical reflection means. And it means whatever, this f of x is whatever equation you have has to get multiplied by a negative. So in our example, when we want to find the equation of this graph, all it means is that our original equation, f of x, whatever it was, gets multiplied by a negative in front. So to start off with, I'm just going to put a negative in a big set of brackets. And what goes into that big set of brackets is whatever we had to begin with. In this case, what did we have to begin with? 1 over negative 2x squared minus 0.5. This is the correct answer. You wouldn't need to simplify it. However, we sometimes find that when we get an answer and we check our answers in the back of the book or at the end of the section, sometimes they're a little bit different. You might have noticed that already. You had the plus 8 on one side, they had minus 8 on the other side, or questions like that. So in this case, this is one of the ones that I think the answer, if there was an answer key, might have a different answer. So the question is, how do we deal with a negative outside of a fraction? How do I put that negative inside of the fraction? How many different ways can you do that? Well, sometimes, and this is a great mathematical strategy, is we look at something similar. What if I had a negative outside of a simpler fraction? What if I had negative maybe 4/5? That's a much easier fraction than this one. How many different ways can you write that negative? Is that the same as, here, I'll write a bunch of different things with negatives, and you tell me which ones are right, which ones are wrong. Maybe they're all right, maybe they're all wrong. Is negative 4/5 the same as negative 4 over 5? Is it the same as 4 over negative 5? Is it the same as negative 4 over negative 5? Are they all right? Are some of them right, or are they all wrong? Is the only way that you can write it as negative 4 over 5? Do you feel confident about one? One being either for sure I know that one's right or for sure I know that one's wrong. Yes, you feel confident about the last one is for sure right or for sure wrong? Is wrong. Why would we say this? Why do you think that one's wrong? Yeah, the negative divided by negative is like positive 4/5, and that doesn't seem to match with negative 4/5. Okay, good. So that's important to recognize. And the reason I say that's important to recognize is because you easily see it when it's easier numbers. However, you'd be surprised how many grade 12 students see this negative here and say, oh, I'm just going to put the negative into the top and into the bottom because it's out in front, and distribute that negative through. And because I don't recognize this as a nice looking fraction, I might not see the mistake that I just did. If you put the negative to the top and the negative to the bottom, we see with the numbers it's wrong. So it's going to be wrong with the algebra as well. How about the other ones? Are they okay? Yes. So what does a negative out in front of a fraction really mean? When I have that negative 4/5, negative 4/5 is really like a negative 1 times that 4/5. And that negative 1 times that 4/5, well, how do we multiply fractions? We multiply fraction times fraction. We multiply the tops, the numerators. We multiply the denominators. So this negative 1 out front, I can make it into a fraction as well. Negative 1 is the same as 1 over, negative 1 over 1, or it's the same as there we go, having that negative on the bottom. So when I'm multiplying this by a negative 1, I could either multiply the top by a negative 1 to put it as a single fraction, or I can multiply the bottom by a negative 1 to put it as a single fraction. In this case, if I thought there was going to be an answer key, I would guess that whoever made the answer key would probably multiply the bottom by a negative 1. And when I multiply the bottom by a negative 1, it's going to get distributed. It's going to be positive 2x squared plus 0.5. And that would be probably what the answer key looks like. This is not wrong if you had your answer like this, but one thing I want you to do is whenever there's a discrepancy between the answer that you got and the answer that is in an answer key, I want you to take the time to algebraically try and manipulate it so that they match, because that's really going to enhance your math skills. Also, what I want you to do when you're doing a question like this is say, okay, so this is the equation of this graph. You did this in grade 11. This is a graph you did in grade 11. Could you come up with this graph from grade 11? Whew, that might take some review. Because this is the hardest graphing you did in grade 11. Reciprocal graphs of parabolas. You might have called this the speed bump graph, right? That brings back memories. This is a speed bump graph. How did you get that graph with this equation? Review that. When those things come up, make those connections and think about those connections. Take some time, because they're just going to make your math stronger all the way through. Now the questions for practice on this one are 7, 8, 9, and 12. I want you to do 12 first, because I find I get the most questions with question number 12. And 9 second, because I get the second most questions from number 9. So I want you to start working on 12 right away, because I would like, if you had questions, that you get to ask them during class, and then do number 9 next.